Hello, it is that time of month again. It is time for me to review all of the books that I read in the month of May. We are going to go in random order because it has been that kind of a month, and I have 13 books to get through, so without any further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to start out with a book that releases actually in a couple of weeks on June 18th. You are going to want to add this to your library hold list right now, or your wish list, or however it is you acquire books, because if you are a fan of fantasy, particularly historical fantasy, I think you're going to really dig this one. And that book is The Cautious Traveler's Guide to the Wasteland by Sarah Brooks. So the publisher provided comp titles for this book are pretty much nonsense to me, at least. One of them was The Midnight Library, and this book is nothing like The Midnight Library. So let me give you 3 comp titles that I think will give you a better idea of what to expect if you decide to read this book. It combines the characters and the setting of Murder on the Orient Express with the kind of vibe of the Night Circus, with some of the creepier aspects of What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. Imagine all of those great books mushed together and you'll get an idea of what you're in for with The Cautious Traveler's Guide to the Wasteland. This book is set in an alternate Victorian Asia. The Trans-Siberian Express is a massive steam engine train that runs between Beijing and Moscow. At some point in the fairly recent past, something happened within the wilds of Siberia. Something happened that made it so that no humans can live there. It is said that even breathing in the air in the wasteland will kill you. So the only way, unless you go the long way around, to get between these places is to take the Trans-Siberian Express, a train which has thick glass and bars on the windows and does not stop 100% for the entire 15-day journey from Beijing to Moscow. On the train's last journey back to China, something happened. No one can quite remember what happened. No one on the crew has a clear memory of exactly what occurred, but they know that they woke up and they were back in the station and that the glass had cracked. The mysterious company that owns the train has decided, I think, that they need, there is money to be made and they need to get this train back in service. And so it set out on its next journey across, even though they don't really know what happened the first time. The author does an excellent job in this book of creating a sense of place, a sense of what the train is like, the decorations on the train, what the wasteland is like when you're looking out the window at this landscape that is so foreign to everything else that you might see. She does a great job of that. And I find that I really enjoy books like that, books that really make you feel like you can just see everything that the characters are seeing and that you're really there. And this did a great job of that for me. I have a little quote from it because I want to give you an example of what the prose is like, because I think especially for a debut novel, which I would not have thought this was, the writing is excellent. Isn't that what everyone wanted? To not be forgotten. To be more than a line and a ledger, the sum total of your life adding up to little more than the strength you wasted to make other men rich. So I think you can tell from that we also have a little bit of social commentary going on about the system, the corporate system that spits people out after they are used up, for a system that values money and monetary gain over perhaps even the lives of people. We have several POVs in this book. We have the child of the train, a child who was born there and has grown up there, and now she is a teenager. She was on the last trip. She doesn't really remember what happened, but she's quite certain that something happened to her. We also have a scientist who is also a man of faith. Those two things within him kind of form his character and his views on the wasteland as being something that was created by God. And that's a very interesting thing to learn about within this book. And then we have a third character who is a POV character, who is the daughter of someone who was on that last train journey. And she's now trying to find out what happened. The plot might move a little bit slowly, especially in the beginning for some people. I think it does a lot. It spends a lot of time setting up the setting and the world and everything going on with that. For me, it was like perfect, and I hate a slow book, and this captivated me from the very, very beginning. I would personally recommend this book for people who are fans of historical fiction in particular, but also I think it had a little bit of an aspect of horror mixed into it. I think that if you're doing the Our Fantasy Bingo card, you could use this for the Eldritch horror square, and I think it would fit perfectly in there. But for me, it was just fantastic. I just really loved it, and it surprised me. So I gave it 4.5 stars, which I might revise later up to a 5. The only reason it wasn't a 5 for me initially is because the ending was fine, but the ending could not have lived up, I think, to the experience I had with the setting of the train itself. The next book I'm going to talk about is going to be the second book in the Stormlight Archive, and that is Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. What can I really say? Like, what do I have to say? This was a 5-star book for me. Stormlight Archive is, I think, my favorite epic fantasy series. This was a reread, and I pretty much think that it is perfect. All of the plot developments, I think the pacing is pretty good. I don't think it's too slow, even though it's an extremely long book. If I have one complaint, and this is the same complaint that I had when I read it the first time, it's that the amount of dad humor in this book is a little bit over the top. It's okay to not be funny, and because I don't find it funny. But if I overlook that dialogue, which is not the majority of the book and only happens between certain characters, then 5-star read, absolutely ready to read Oathbringer. Cannot wait to continue on with these characters. One thing I did this month that was a new and different experience for me was that I chose to do a buddy read with my partner, Sean. He picked out the book, and the book is Northwoods by Daniel Mason. So first of all, I want to say that the ridiculously muscular cat on the cover has kind of grown on me. Initially, I was saying, what the heck is that? Why is that cat so muscular? It's very strange looking, but the cat is actually in the book, so it worked out for me. So this book is really hard to explain. It is kind of a interconnected set of short stories, all taking place on the same piece of land, some within the same house in New England from the days of the Pilgrims all the way up to past our present day and into the future. Every chapter is its own story, and then in between those we have interludes, which might be other stories, but they might also be something else. It has very much the feel of found material, and I'm going to show you an example of that I bookmarked. For instance, we get on page 173 here, we have a picture that has something to do, I think, with the story right before it. And then we get into the interlude, and we have a December song, another ballad by a pair of grave maids to the tune of When Phoebus Did Rest for fife and voice. So, I don't know, it's just really fun. And then we have a picture of this gentleman and a cat. So it's a lot of kind of found material in addition to the stories that make up the book. All of the hype about this book is 100% justified. It is fantastic. It makes you care about the characters even when you only know them for a short period of time. I just really loved it. It was probably a 4.5-star book for me again. Didn't quite make it to 5, although I'm probably rounding it up to 5, just because, again, the ending, we go into the future in the last chapter, and for me, where the author chose to go with the future was not where I was hoping it was going to go, so that was a little bit disappointing for me. But other than that, I love this book. It's so good. It's so it even has these passages that are really funny. For instance, we have at the very beginning, we have a gentleman who plants a grove of apples, which continues on to be a theme within the book. And he's talking about the difficulties of farming in, the 1700s. And he says, "There is not a fence that will keep out the porcupine. To try is folly. One must pay one's taxes sometimes." And just, I don't know, it's just very witty. And I love the idea, as someone who currently lives in a very old house, that you can kind of peek into the lives of all the people who have been in this place before you, which, by the way, I am not saying to any ghosts that might be listening that I would like to meet you, because I would not. Maybe, read a story, see something written down. That would be pretty cool. Daniel Mason just did a fantastic job. It's really unlike anything else I've ever read. And if you're on the fence I don't read a ton of literary fiction, but this was perfect for me. I really loved it. Next, I read something very different from that, and that is what I would describe as a horror love story that's also a comedy, and that is Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. Shi Shen is our monster, and at the beginning of the book, some monster hunters invade her lair, and she's very just like, are you guys really doing this again? But she does end up getting injured in her attempts to escape the monster hunters. And then she has to be nursed back to health by a woman named Homily. Homily is the daughter of the ruling family in this little area. And she has no idea that Shi Shen is a monster, because the kind of monster that Shi Shen is, it's kind of described as kind of like a little bit of a blob monster, but she has the ability to create her own skeleton and her own kind of internal organ structure using both organic and inorganic material that she forms into like hands and fingers and things. And I kept trying to picture what that would be, but I could not picture what that would look like. Like, does she have skin? You know what? I think you just need to not question that. The book has a lot of interesting themes. It touches on themes of abuse. It touches on themes of family and whether or not you owe anything to the family of your origin as opposed to the family that you choose. I do have a really cute quote by Shi Shen. So she says, she's saying to someone, "I work outside of town." "Oh, that's darling. Are you a shepherd?" "I sometimes work with sheep." That was kind of true. She stole and ate them when it was possible. There you go. So it's also definitely, I would say, a horror story. It has a lot of gore and a lot of talk of, entrails and spinal columns and all that kind of stuff. I did do a reading vlog on this, so I will link that down below if you want to see my thoughts on this as I'm reading it, with a little bit of time to kind of digest it, no pun intended there. I actually think I like it a little bit better than I did initially. I think the amount of gore in it kind of surprised me and it took my rating down. I gave it a 3.5, but I raised it up to a 4-star rating. I think that it's a really sweet tale, and it's just something that's really going to be unlike anything else than you've ever read. But if you love a found family, you like some scary things with some sweet and cute things mixed into them, I think this could be the book for you, and I would recommend it. So I also had, in the month of May, I had a couple of DNFs that I'm just going to talk about really briefly. The first one is a soft DNF, and that for me means that I'm probably going to go back and finish the book at a later point, but I was just not in the mood for it at the time. And that is The Vanished Birds by Simon Jiminez. So The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jiminez is one of my favorite books that I've read this year. It's a great fantasy book. You should definitely check it out if you haven't read it. This is a sci-fi story. In this book, we are following a world where we can travel long distances across space, but in order to do so, we have to fold time. And so time will move at a different pace for the people who are on the spaceships than other places. We also have in this book, we have a mysterious boy. We don't know where he came from. He's on a spaceship. There's a lot of stuff. I got to about 60% of the way through, and it was just, I was really invested in the first part. The first section of the book reads like a short story that is it's connected to the rest of the book, but it's not the main plot line. And I think that's what threw me off, because I loved that first part so much. I actually read that Simon Jiminez wrote that part first as kind of a story to prove the concept of the book. But then once we got into the rest of the book, I found I didn't care about those characters quite as much. And then in the second part, we have a different POV character who I really didn't care about. So it's just very slow. So I put it down for now because I could just feel I was getting annoyed, and there's no point in getting annoyed in your reading. But I do think I'm going to go back and finish it later, because I am really interested to see how the story ends up. And if you hear a lot of noises, it is Memorial Day, so my neighbors are setting off fireworks in the daytime. All right. I had 2 other DNFs within the month of May. The first one was Part of Your World by Abby Jiminez. I actually read very little of this book, So I probably can't talk about it a lot. I could just tell from the first, I think, 4 or 5 chapters that it was not going to be the romance for me. There were just things about it that were not what I prefer in my romance. I like kind of like a slow burn, and this was not going to be a slow burn. And I wasn't sure that I really was going to like the main female character, and I just wasn't in the mood. So I put it down. It's the first one of her books that I picked up. If you have a suggestion for a different one for me, I would love to hear it. Or if you want to talk me into picking up Part of Your World again, I'm very picky with romances, and I could just feel that there might be some things about this one that were not going to work for me personally. No shade if you loved it. I know a lot of people really did. And then my last DNF of the month, before we move on to some more great books, was The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley. And I, again, have this in my reading vlog, which I will link down below, so you can hear more about my thoughts. I do think a lot of people are really going to love this book. It is a story about a Ministry of Time within the British government, where they basically are kind of going back and kidnapping people who were about to die in the past, because they have this doorway to the past, and you cannot think about the time travel in this book because it will just straight tell you it doesn't make sense. Don't worry about that. I thought it was very charming. I thought the writing was very charming in this kind of British kind of way at the beginning. But the problem I had was that the character who is brought into the present to kind of be assimilated into the present with our main female character who falls in love with him was an actual real Arctic explorer who died. And there was just something about putting him into a love story and writing this character that just didn't feel like it just kind of gave me the ick, you know. It was the ick, and I didn't want to do it. I just felt like, again, I don't want to, like, you know, say anything bad if it was something that you enjoyed. It was just, for me personally, that kind of thing, just for some reason, I can't read that. So I had to put it down, but I do think a lot of people are going to really like it. So don't take that as an anti-recommendation. Just be aware of that, just in case you're someone who, like me, can't read like the real person fanfic. All right, so moving on to the rest of the books that I did finish in May. I would like to talk about Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. So Two Twisted Crowns is the sequel to One Dark Window. One Dark Window was a 5-star read for me when I read it last month. I think it was last month. And Two Twisted Crowns was just as good. It is a romantasy story set in a dark fairy tale kingdom where we have this deck of magical cards that allow people to have various powers, like heal themselves or control people or be really beautiful or lots of different things. In the first book, we are following a different set of romantic characters than we do in the second one. One of the main characters in the second book is Elm. So if you read the first book and you really enjoyed him as much as I did, then this is going to be his story. I really just thought it was a really satisfying conclusion to the story. And it, again, remains for me, this duology, an example of how you do a romantasy, and you do a romantasy really well. It was well written. The characters treated each other respectfully. It didn't have a lot of romance novel tropes that nobody likes. It didn't feel too young adult for me. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think that if you are looking maybe for that kind of more traditional fantasy romance, this would probably be a pretty good pick, and I would definitely recommend that you read it. So one thing I've been trying to do recently within the past year is get into reading more novellas. I always thought I wouldn't like a novella because they're short, and I thought there would be not enough time for the story to develop for me in a way that was interesting, but that was wrong. I found some really fantastic novellas that I've read in the past year, and so when I was offered an ARC for When Among Crows by Veronica Roth, I was really excited to pick it up. So this book is a novella. It is set in a, I would say, kind of an urban fantasy world. And I mean that in that kind of like early 2000s kind of way, where it's like our world in specific, it's Chicago, except that there are mystical creatures living and hiding among us. Who would ever have known, right? So it's that kind of thing. So if you miss that kind of thing, which I don't think we see as much anymore, you probably really like this. I thought this one in particular is based on Slavic and Polish folklore. The main character is actually trying to find the witch Baba Yaga, if you know the Baba Yaga story, in order to ask her for something mysterious. We don't know what. I will say that if you are interested in reading this book, please do not read the synopsis. The synopsis of the book has a major spoiler in it for something that we don't find out about until 3/4 of the way through this novella. So I read it, but then I forgot about it because my memory's like, but don't read it because it will spoil it for you, okay? Just say, yes, that sounds really interesting to me, and it's only 120 pages, so I would love to read that, and go for it. I gave it, I think 3.5 stars. I thought it was really good. I thought it was well written. It was just that for me, this felt more like the prelude to a story than the story itself. And I don't know if she's planning to write any more books within this universe, but I would definitely be interested to read a full-length novel that was set in the same universe. I don't know if she was like testing it out, like, is this something that's gonna work? But I thought it was really interesting and I liked the characters. It just felt a little bit incomplete. So that's where I ended up at a 3.5 stars. But I think that if you're interested in it, I would definitely recommend it. And I read it in like 2 hours. So you can get right through this. Okay, speaking of books that are associated with novellas, I also read A Master of Djinn by P. Djeli Clark. This book is set in his, I think it's the Dead Djinn universe, I think is what it's called. So he has a short story called A Dead Djinn in Cairo, or I think it's a novella, actually. I haven't read it. And he also has a short story or two that are also set within this same world. And the book constantly references the things that happened in those, but I haven't read them. So maybe he might have done like that same kind of thing that I said Veronica Roth should be doing. I don't know, maybe. But I really enjoyed this book. It is set in an alternate 1912 Cairo where jinns are real, magic is real. There is a ministry, wait, I have to look up the name because it's very long. It is the Ministry of Alchemy, Enchantments, and Supernatural Entities. Sure, she's a detective with them. So when an entire kind of cult or brotherhood, when they're suddenly murdered, she gets called in, our main character, Fatma, to kind of try to figure out what's going on. It's just really good. It's kind of steampunky a little bit. There are airships, things run off of steam. It has a very strong sense of place, which, as I mentioned earlier in this video, is something that I really, really love. It just really transported me to this other world, and I was totally on board with all of these different kinds of jinns, not a mythology that I knew anything about before. With this alternative Cairo, I mean, I want to visit Cairo so badly now, even though I know it's not gonna be exactly like this, but I just thought this was a really fantastic book. It was the first thing that I've read from the author. I definitely want to read more, and I really hope he's going to be putting some more books out within this same universe. I gave this 4 stars, didn't reach 5, only because I didn't think that the characterizations were quite as strong as the world building, but I thought it was really great. And you're interested in a fantasy that is set somewhere different, I think this would be a really fantastic choice. I also, this month, finally read Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. So this is probably one of the last Leigh Bardugo things that I needed to read. So I read Shadow and Bone, which I didn't like that much, to be honest. It's very young adult. And then I read Ninth House and its sequel, both of which were 5-star reads for me. And then I most recently read The Familiar, which I gave 4 stars and also really enjoyed, which is her historical fantasy. People have talked up Six of Crows to me so much. They've been like, oh my gosh, you've got to read Six of Crows. It's the best one. And I think it's a great book. It is in the same universe as Shadow and Bone, but the funny thing for me was that whereas I felt like the characters in Shadow and Bone felt much younger than they were supposed to be, I thought every character in Six of Crows, I just mentally adjusted their ages by at least a decade ahead in order to have them make any sense. Like, they're supposed to be teenagers because it's a young adult book, but they did not feel like teenagers to me in the slightest. So as far as I'm concerned, they're not. So this is a heist story. This is about a gang of people who are trying to pull off this heist. There's a very found family kind of feel from the gang itself. There is a lot going on with magic and the people within this world called Grisha who can do magic. I'm sure so many of you have already read this book that you don't need me to explain the entire synopsis of Six of Crows, but I thought it was really good. In terms of where my favorite books by this author fall, this did not reach the heights for me that Ninth House did. Ninth House remains my favorite of her books, but it was a solid 4-star fantasy read, and I'm definitely going to be picking up the sequel, Crooked Kingdom, I think is what it's called, soon, so that I can find out what happens. But Leigh Bardugo is just a great author. She's one of my favorite fantasy writers, so I will read anything that she writes at this point. Next, I read something a little bit different, which is a sci-fi romance, and this is Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. So this book, it is the story of a prince. His name is Prince Kiem, and an ambassador. His name is Jainen. And they end up in an arranged marriage because these different worlds have to have their kind of like political alliances strengthened by people from the different countries being wed to one another. So they have to marry each other in the beginning. It's very kind of tropey arranged marriage of convenience kind of thing. It's very, oh no, there's only one bed, like that kind of thing, which makes it sound like a lot less than what I think it is. I really, really loved this book. I loved the romance. I loved the fact that it was set in this world with all of this political intrigue going on. There is a mystery. We're actually kind of trying to solve the mystery of what happened to Jainen's previous husband, who has passed away before the book begins, and the project that he was working on, and what's going on with that. And is there a conspiracy? Spoiler, probably yes. But it was very good. It was not just a mystery. It was not just a romance. It wasn't just a political story. It was all of those things together. And as I've already said, very into mysteries that are stuck into other types of books right now. I really loved it. I will say, if miscommunication is something that really gets your goat in romance novels, this book suffers a little bit from not what I would say is miscommunication so much as just, I'm just going to assume something and never ask you about it kind of thing, which maybe that is miscommunication. I don't know. It does have a lot of that, so just be aware, but it's a really cute story. They're adorable together. I loved it. It was 4.5 stars, and there is another book in the same universe that I am planning to read at some point soon, but I would highly recommend this one. I just thought it was very sweet, very cute, and I'm glad they got their happily ever after, because they deserved it. All right, staying in that romance vein, I read the second book in Once Upon a Broken Heart, The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. So this is the second book, as I said. It is the story of Evangeline, who, through a series of events that are spoilers for the first book, ends up partnered with a fate named Jax in order to save a prince and a lot of other things. There's a lot of stuff going on within this world and within this book. So the first book I thought was adorable and cute and fluffy and not super serious necessarily, very young adult. But I gave it a solid 4 stars. I really liked it. This book, I think my feelings are kind of mixed a little bit. I had kind of the same feelings that it's very cute. It's very adorable. I am invested in the characters. In particular, I really love Jax. I also think it was kind of a mess a little bit in some ways. Like, I don't know how many times Evangeline could get herself into a situation where Jax has to swoop in and save her, because I think it was like 50 times just like within this book. It was a lot, right? And of course there's, miscommunication and misunderstanding and all of those things. And Evangeline is the most naive person I have ever met. But in spite of that, it's still a 3.5 read for me because I had a good time, and I read this in less than 24 hours, even though I think it's 400 pages. Yeah, so if you read the first book and you're like, should I continue on? Go ahead. I haven't read the third book yet, and I see that it is controversial. So I'm gonna read it soon and see what I think about it. But overall, could this have used probably a little bit of a stronger editing? Yes, but I also completely understand why it's so popular, and I recommend the series. Then we have one more new release for the month of May, and that is The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton. I had previously read The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by the same author, and I really, really loved it. And so when I saw that he was writing a book that was a mystery, a twisty kind of mystery, just like that one, but also it was going to be sci-fi, I was like, yes, please sign me up. So we have a world where we have these villagers who are living on an island, and they are essentially the only people left alive. A mysterious fog that is filled with these, I don't know, kind of like carnivorous bugs, it seems like angry lightning bugs, has come through and killed everyone in the world. And this happened about 100 years ago. And the villagers are the only people left, except for these 3 scientists who are people who are left over, humans who are left over from the old world. And I gather that they live for much longer. This is set in the future. They live for much longer than us. So yes, they're like 90, 150 years old, but they don't look 150 years old. I don't know. The villagers live this kind of low-tech, idyllic, we all love each other kind of lifestyle. Also seems a little bit like it might be a little bit dystopian. Like, this is a perfect society, except it's probably really not. That kind of thing. And then about 30% of the way into the book, I'm letting you know that because don't think it's going to happen at the beginning, there is a murder. And that is the murder that's in the title. And then from there on, one of the villagers, her name is Emery, who has never fit in with the other villagers because she's just too inquisitive, is charged with solving the murder. And she has a time limit because I think within 48 hours of the murder that has happened, the fog is going to come into the island and kill everyone. So that's the setup. And of course, we're gonna find out lots of stuff. Things aren't gonna be exactly the way that, it seems like they are, obviously, in this kind of book. I would say I was a really big fan of the TV show Lost. Maybe not like the last season, but the rest of it. I thought it was really great, especially at the beginning, all of the mysteries, and we found this thing, and what does it mean? And there were these people here before, and who were they? And this book reminded me so much of that, and I just loved it so much. This was a 5-star read for me. I would recommend it super highly, especially if you like things like the TV show Lost, if you like a mystery that has kind of a sci-fi speculative element to it. I don't know if the mystery is one that you could have figured out ahead of time, because it is kind of dependent on information that maybe, you don't have the whole time. But I'm not someone that reads a mystery to figure out who solved the mystery. I'm reading the mystery to be along for the ride with the people solving the mystery. So I could honestly care less if I can tell if it can be solved. So that may be something that won't work for some people. The narrator of the book is actually the omniscient AI of the island who kind of lives inside all of the heads of these people. And through the AI's viewpoint, we get the viewpoints of all of these different people. So we can kind of see inside their heads a little bit. So it is a little bit different, I think, in that way. But for me, it really, really worked. It was 5 stars. I need to go back and read his other book, the one that is kind of, I think, set on a ship, but is still a mystery. I don't know. I just really loved it, and I would highly recommend this one. It was a 5-star read. All right, that's gonna do it for me for this month. It was a great month, read a lot of pages, had a lot of great reads, and I am looking forward to doing it all over again in June, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.